Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. So today I want to talk about all of the eyeshadow pans that I have hit so far in 2022. If you haven't seen, I did do a video a couple weeks ago talking about all of the pans I want to hit next year, so I thought today would be a good day to just recap all of the pans I've hit so far this year and just sit down, talk about them, and honestly kind of remind myself of all the pans that I've hit this year, because some of them I know I've definitely forgotten about, but I just thought this would be a fun video. I've seen quite a few other creators do this as well, and I think it's just a good way to show your progress throughout the year. So I'm just going to go through, I have a spreadsheet of all of my eyeshadows and if I've hit pan on them and the date that I hit pan on them. So I'm just going to go through that spreadsheet. So this isn't going to be in chronological order, but I will tell you what month I hit pan on each of these shades. So if that interests you, then please keep on watching. So the first palette up here is my ABH Modern Renaissance palette, and I have currently 5 pans in this palette, and I hit one this year, and that is the shade Cypress Umber right over here. So I hit this one in May of this year, so it's been a little while since I've actually panned a shade in this palette, which is surprising because this is one of my favorites in my collection, and these shades are fairly easy to hit pan on, so I'm a little surprised that I haven't gotten another one recently, but I'm definitely working towards getting some more very soon. Next, we have my BH Cosmetics Nouveau Neutrals palette, and this one has 3 pans in it. So the one that I hit this year is this light gold over here. So I hit this one back in March of this year. So these ones are definitely earlier pans that I hit in the year, but this is one of my favorite shades in this palette, super easy to use, so I am not surprised that it has a pan now. I definitely focused in on an area just because I was using a smaller brush, and I typically just tend to naturally reach into an area in a pan, especially if I'm using a smaller brush, so this one was a little bit more targeted, but still happy to see another pan. I just really enjoy hitting pan because it shows that I'm getting use out of my shadows, so I am working towards a few more in this palette as well, so stay tuned for an update. Hopefully next year I will do the same video, and hopefully I'll have a few more pans in this palette. Next up, we have my Colourpop It's a Princess Thing palette. So here are the shades in here. This one is a bit harder to see because of the packaging. I think you might be able to see there. So I hit pan on these 2 shades this past year. So Fairy Godmother was first. I hit that one in April. And then Ray I hit in September, so that makes 3 pans in this palette. Colourpop shadows are definitely harder to show progress on, so I'm slowly working my way through this palette as well, but only 3 pans so far. Alright, next up we have my Tarte Toasted palette. So I hope you can see here I have a pan in the shade Cashmere. This is probably my most exciting pan of this year. Personally, I have been working towards this one for quite a long time now. I've had this palette probably for 4 or 5 years, I would guess, and I am finally showing a pan in this palette. These shades are very hard pressed, very pigmented, so I don't need a lot of it, and they are also a little on the deeper side, so this is my first pan in this palette, and I am so incredibly excited that I finally got one to show. Alright, next up we have my palette that has the most pans so far in my collection. So the one shade that I hit pan on in this palette this year was this 5th shade right here. And I just hit this one earlier this month, so I have not really focused in on this palette too much. I've gotten quite a few new palettes in my collection recently that have taken some focus away from my older ones, so only one pan so far this year, but I'm hoping to get this one fully panned very soon. And then we have another Wet n Wild 10-pan palette. This is the Not a Basic Peach palette. So I hit 3 pans this year. Okay, yeah, sorry, I just had to double check, but I did hit all 3 of these this year. So the first one that I hit was this shade over here. I hit this one back in February. And then this one I hit in June of this year. And then this shade right here I also hit earlier this month. So 3 new pans to show in this palette. I hope you guys can see all of the pans. Some of them are kind of smaller in a more targeted area. For the most part, it just depends on the type of brush that I use. Like I said earlier, if I'm using a smaller brush, it's a more targeted area. If I'm using a fluffier brush, there's likely to be a bigger area with a pan in it. Alright, next up we have my Profusions Mixed Metals Peach palette. So I hit 2 pans so far this year, so hope you guys can see those. So the first one I hit is the shade Polite. I hit this one back in January. And then the shade Special I hit in September. So 2 new pans in this palette. Once again, one of the older palettes in my collection. So I'm happy it is starting to show some love. Next up we have my Wet n Wild Walking on Eggshells quad. So I hit 1 pan this year, and that is the shade Brow Bone. See if we can get a good angle for you guys to see it. But I hit this one in October, so fairly recently, and I'm really happy to finally have another pan in this palette. This is not one that I reach for all that often, just because I have more, I guess, exciting palettes in my collection. Quads aren't typically what I reach for, especially neutral quads like this, but for super easy everyday looks, this one is perfect. Alright, next we have my Glitter Realm A Whole New World palette. So here is this one on the inside, and I think you can see the 2 shades here. So I hit pan on the shade Sultan first back in January, and then I hit pan on the shade Enchantment in July. I absolutely adore this palette, and those 2 shades especially are 2 of my most used, and I'm happy that they are showing the progress that I have been putting into them. So this one was super exciting. This is my first 2 pans in this palette, so I was really happy to get those this year. Alright, next up we have my Maybelline Lemonade Craze palette right here. So I hit 2 pans in this palette this year. So the first one that I hit was the shade Citrus right here. I don't know how well you'll be able to see this pan, but I hit this one in June of this year, and then I hit pan in Lemonade Craze in August. So these shades are super easy to hit pan on, so I'm hoping for some more very soon, but those are the 2 that I hit this year. Next up we have my Colourpop Midnight Masquerade palette, and another one with gold packaging. So the shade that I hit pan on was Royal Ball right here, this glitter shade. This was completely unexpected when I hit pan on it. I have only used this one a handful of times maybe. I don't really use pressed glitters all that often. So it was very much a surprise to have hit pan on this shade, but I am happy to have another one in this palette. Alright, next up we have my e.l.f. Retro Paradise palette. And the shade that I hit pan on in this one this year was the shade Sea Salt, and I hit this one back in February. Super easy shade to use. I just used it in my inner corner mostly, and it was just a pretty targeted area with a small brush for the inner corner, so it didn't take too long, and this one is a little bit of a chunkier shade as well. So pretty easy to hit pan on, and I'm looking forward to getting some more use out of this palette in the near future. Alright, next up we have my I Heart Revolution Beauty and the Beast palette. And the shade that I hit pan on is Magic Mirror right here. Again, I don't know how well you'll be able to see this just because the pan kind of blends in with the shade, but I hit this one back in July. Once again, just a super easy inner corner shade to use, so this one did not take too much effort, but I am happy to have a pan in this palette. It's my first pan in this palette, so that was super exciting. Next up we have my ABH Soft Glam palette. So I currently have 2 pans in this palette, and I hit one of them this year, and that is the shade Temper right here. So I hit this one in October, so just last month. So pretty happy about that one. Once again, ABH shadows are super easy to hit pan on, especially in this palette I'm finding. I already have pretty significant dips forming in some of the other shades, so I am anticipating some more very soon, but that is the one that I hit this year, which makes a total of 2 in this palette. Alright, next up we have my Rude Cosmetics Roaring Twenties Carefree palette, and the shade I hit pan on is Cat's Meow right here. So I hope you can see it. It kind of just looks like a speck of the shimmer that's in here, but I promise that is a pan. This one was a lot easier than I expected. It's a pretty shallow pan actually, so I was pretty happy to get a new pan in this palette, but it definitely came faster than I was expecting. Next up we have my Be Bella Cosmetics Daisy Days palette, and I think this one is one of my most used this year, and I got my first pan this year as well. So I hit pan in the shade Evergreen right here. And I hit this one back in April of this year, so this one was definitely a good one to hit. I was really happy about it. Like I said, my first pan in this palette, so that's always exciting, and I just really, really love this palette, so it was nice to get some good dedicated use out of it. Next up we have my Huda Beauty Nude Light palette. So the shade I hit pan on is this 6th shade right here. And this one was super easy to hit pan on. I hit it in May, and it was just pretty easy to reach for. These shades are pretty shallow. I had heard that the Obsessions palettes from Huda Beauty are pretty easy to hit pan on, and I would definitely have to agree with that statement. I feel like this one only took me maybe around 15 uses. So yeah, pretty easy to hit pan on, they're fairly shallow, and it's just a beautiful shade to use for everyday looks as well. Alright, next up we have my NYX Ultimate Utopia palette, and we are coming to the end of the pans I hit this year, but the shade I hit pan on was this 9th shade right here, this light green shimmer, and I hit this one back in March. This one is probably my favorite shade in this palette, and I was really happy to get some good dedicated use out of it. It was, again, fairly easy to hit pan on actually, and I am happy to see that this palette has some good use on it and see a little shiny pan in here. Alright, then my last shade that I hit pan on comes from my Be Bella Cosmetics Sweet Sunflower palette. So I hit this one back in August, and it is the shade Rustic right here. So this one came as a definite surprise to me. This was a lot shallower than I expected it to be, but I did notice that the shadow wasn't pressed all the way up to the top of the pan. It starts lower in the pan. I don't know if that makes sense, but it is shallower than I was expecting, and definitely easier to hit pan on as well for that reason. So I am happy to see a pan in this palette, but there was definitely not as much product in here as I was expecting. So those are all of the pans that I hit in 2022 so far. So I hit a total of 25 so far, I believe, if I counted correctly. And I'm hoping to get at least a couple more by the end of the year, but I just wanted to update this now or show you all the pans now just because I have more usage videos planned for the end of the year, kind of going over all of my palette usage in general. So if that is something that you think will interest you, then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. And let me know what you thought of this video. Let me know if you've been panning any shadows recently, how many you've panned this year, if that applies. And let me know also what else you would like to see from me, if you'd like to see more panning content, if you'd like to see different videos with my eyeshadow palettes. I am always happy to talk about, play with, and just discover new eyeshadows. Those are my favorite in my collection, so that is typically what I enjoy focusing on. So let me know if you have any other video suggestions. Give this video a thumbs up if you did enjoy. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of my future uploads. And with all of that said, I will see you in my next video. Bye!